Israel has attacked a school in central Gaza, killing at least 14 Palestinians sheltering in the UN building. 2 UNRWA employees and several children are reportedly amongst those killed. This is the 5th time that the Al Juni school has come under Israeli attack after becoming a shelter for Palestinians displaced by the war. Located in the built-up Nusrat refugee camp, the Gazan civil defense say they are still recovering bodies from the site of the attack. The death toll at Nusrat brings the total of Palestinians killed by Israel in the last 24 hours to at least 45 people. Worryingly, the IDF also appears to be targeting whole families. In Khan Yunis, an airstrike on a residential building has killed 13 people. All were reportedly members of a single family, the Al-Karaz, and 8 of them were children. In the Burej refugee camp in central Gaza, the home of the Abu Sadeh family, was also hit by an Israeli missile, killing a young girl and injuring 5 others. The Al-Najjar family also appeared to have been targeted in the Jabalia refugee camp in northern Gaza. According to reports, 6 people were killed. They included 2 children and their parents. The targeting of entire Palestinian families has been a running theme of Israel's war on Gaza. By June this year, at least 60 families in Palestine had lost 25 or more family members to Israeli bombs. A quarter of them had seen 50 or more family members killed. The deliberate killing of families across multiple generations is a key part of South Africa's genocide case against Israel at the International Court of Justice. But it's not just Palestinian families that are being targeted by Israel. Aid workers delivering essential polio vaccines have come under fire too. Last month, polio re-emerged in Gaza after having been eradicated in the area a quarter of a century ago. And after a 10-month-old boy was paralyzed by the virus, Israel agreed to hold brief pauses in its assault to allow the UN to vaccinate the enclave's 640,000 surviving children. But on Monday, a UN convoy carrying 12 staff to support the polio vaccination rollout in northern Gaza was detained and attacked by Israeli forces. UN spokesperson Stefan Dujarric described what happened.
The situation escalated very quickly, with soldiers pointing their weapons directly towards our personnel in the convoy. The UN vehicles were encircled by Israeli forces and shots were fired. The convoy was then approached by IDF tanks and a bulldozer, which proceeded to ram the UN vehicles from the front and from the back, compacting the convoy with the UN staff inside. One bulldozer dropped debris on the first vehicle, while Israeli soldiers threatened staff, making it impossible for them to safely exit the vehicles.
2 of those UN staff members were taken for interrogation and held for 7.5 hours. Dujarric went on to describe the attack as, quote, the latest example of the unacceptable dangers and impediment that humanitarian personnel in Gaza are experiencing. Now, Israel has also been accused of violating the vaccination pauses by bombing in areas near to roll out centres. Euromed Human Rights Monitor say that suggests a deliberate strategy to obstruct the polio vaccination campaign. Naturally, people will be more wary of taking their kids to areas where Israel has bombed nearby. But even before the polio outbreak, experts argued that Israel was deliberately promoting disease in Gaza. Obviously, it's common for diseases to spread more rapidly in war zones, but Israel's systematic destruction of hospitals and sanitation infrastructure is unprecedented. And some Israelis have even said it out loud last year. This was retired IDF Major General Giora Island, who wrote this. The international community warns us of a humanitarian disaster in Gaza and of severe epidemics. We must not shy away from this, as difficult as that may be. After all, severe epidemics in the south of the Gaza Strip will bring victory closer. Now, I remember sort of reporting on this statement at the time, so in November last year, saying that this is the sort of genocidal language that's coming from senior Israeli politicians. Well, now this seems to be the genocidal action which is following. Targeting whole Palestinian families, blocking the rollout of essential vaccinations. These are, by anyone's definition, war crimes. And earlier this month, the UK finally suspended 30 weapons export licenses to Israel because of the risk that British arms would be used to break international humanitarian law. 320 arms licenses remain untouched by the ban, leading Amnesty to call it gesture politics. But it turns out even that was too much for the United States. US Secretary of State Antony Blinken last month lobbied British Foreign Secretary David Lammy over that partial ban, according to Politico. Blinken asked Lammy what it would take for the UK to reconsider the weapons suspension. Lammy reportedly told Blinken that the suspension would only be reversed by a ceasefire in Gaza and access by international human rights organizations to Palestinians in Israeli prisons. Of course, that partial weapons ban doesn't go nearly far enough. At the TUC Congress in Brighton, delegates have been voting on a motion calling on the government to ban all arms sales to Israel. This was Palestinian ambassador to the UK, Hussam Zomlot, making the case for a full embargo.
While we welcome the decision by the UK government to suspend some arms licenses to Israel, it is simply unconscionable that the UK should continue to deliver any arms to Israel, given what it is clear to everyone, including according to UK lawyers, to be a grave violation of international law. This is a legal obligation, domestically and internationally.
That motion has now been passed by TUC delegates. It was interesting, sort of an interview we showed you yesterday with Dave Ward from the CWU and my colleague Polly Smythe ended with a question about Palestine. I thought Dave Ward's answer was really interesting. He was sort of talking about how, this issue, they want to be campaigning on it, but it does pose a challenge because they do have to bring their members along with them. He said some of their members think, why are we campaigning on Palestine? I want you to be campaigning on my working conditions. Others who are not sure where they stand on the conflict, but obviously the TUC has now said loud and clear that we want a much stronger position from the UK government when it comes to holding Israel to account, and suspending 30 arms licenses out of 330 isn't that.
When it comes to the TUC motion, I find it very interesting that we've seen lots of groups now who've been essentially making really kind of strong statements in terms of trying to force the hand of the government in trying to change its position. Of course, we saw at the Green Party conference them passing a motion, not just obviously, I think it was reported specifically on the idea of them referring to Israel's actions as genocidal, but also the explicit condemnations of all arms sales and indeed condemnation of diplomatic relations with an apartheid state. So there's been very strong condemnation from the Green Party. And now for the TUC passing this motion wanting all arms licenses to be banned. And on top of that, we've seen a lot of pressure from the government from the Liberal Democrats. Their foreign affairs spokesperson, Lola Moran, is obviously of Palestinian descent. And she's been very forceful in trying to hold the government to account over its relationships with Israel during the conflict in Gaza too. So given that the movement has been very small, there's been a very small movement by David Lammy over how we are changing our relationship by suspending fewer than 10% of the arms licenses we currently have on very kind of nebulous grounds of them being potentially offensive rather than defensive, which to me seems completely nonsensical. Either you think that they are violating IHL or you don't think they are. So this minute measure doesn't really seem that much to me. Funnily enough, that very small measure was still enough to get Antony Blinken mad. And props to David Lammy, his answer was correct. Like, they have to stop the conflict. If they keep doing the conflict, then they're going to keep committing the same kind of war crimes, which has led us to take this legal decision to halt some arms licenses. Whilst his approach to essentially standing up to American foreign policy in this one is to be lauded, that is, again, only within the context of not actually doing what is fundamentally should be done, which is suspending all arms licenses whilst what is being carried out is being carried out. Because as we've seen, what is being carried out, according to what you can intuit from the statements that have been made, are such things as you said, targeting aid workers, whether it be food aid workers, or in this case, those trying to administer life-saving vaccines. And this admission by this retired IDF person around, well, actually, this can't be avoided, the idea that there might be a smaller population in Gaza if these epidemics start to spread. And well, of course, any kind of way they're going to have plausible deniability by saying, we've had this humanitarian pauses to try and get these vaccinations done. How dare you try and hold our feet to the fire over this while simultaneously striking those aid workers, is a way of being able to try and soft engineering the conditions with which Palestinians will be more likely to vacate the territory or be taken in as refugees elsewhere, such that, again, under the current administration's stated goals, which is Israeli sovereignty between the river and the sea. So definitely the warning signs are being shown in the loosest of terms over Israel's conduct with regards to these vaccination pauses that we've seen, and we can't really take everything at face value.